The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Montyman.
Well, greetings one and all. And there you are, there we are, and we, meaning myself and our good friend Chris S. Chris, how the heck is it going over there on the other side of the country?
It's going okay. There's no fires. We're doing okay over here on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And I hope everything is great in Oregon.
Yep. It is exactly the way it's supposed to be this time of year. Wet, wild, and just wet and wild. Indeed. So it's good to be in a nice warm studio. And, of course, with one of the warmest personalities I know, Mr. Chris. So what are we doing this week, buddy?
We're going through the memorial articles in the book Language of the Heart. And tonight we're going to be reading Bill's memorial to Ebby, which is going to be really interesting. Ebby is the person who brought the religious message to Bill Wilson and got him to start thinking about a possible recovery program, because
Past his own prejudices even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ebby did a number of things that were extraordinary. One of them was convincing Bill that there's a way to stop drinking. Bill had been trying like crazy. He'd been going to Towns Hospital. He'd been talking to doctors and psychiatrists. He'd been doing everything he could. He'd been putting his name in the Bible. I swear, by God, I'm done drinking. And then he'd be drunk. And so Ebby shows up and he's months sober, and he's looking good. He's in a good suit. How we look after we've been sober for a while. The weight starts to come back to our face, and our eyes start to get a little bit brighter, and so when Ebby showed up that way, it got Bill thinking, and Bill wanted to know what he was doing.
They were drinking buddies, weren't they? Drinking buddies?
They were huge drinking buddies.
Yeah.
They caused all kinds of problems up in Vermont. A lot of people had summer cottages in Vermont, when they lived in New York City, and so that's how Bill knew Ebby. The Manchester, Vermont area, and so they were friends, and they would hang out together in New York. And he knew Ebby was a total drunk, worse than he was. And all of a sudden, here he is sober. Now Bill wasn't accepting right away of a religious answer, like many of us, Monty.
Sure.
Somebody trying to jam a certain particular religious concept down our throats is not going to work out real well. If we're alcoholic, so they got into this back and forth. And what it was finally Ebby raised his hand and said, okay, Bill, whatever concept of God you believe in, as long as you believe in a concept, because that's your only hope you know.
Yeah.
So right away, Alcoholics Anonymous didn't, learn the lesson that we're not going to tell you exactly what kind of a God to believe in. We're just going to tell you if you don't believe in God, you're not going to survive.
Hmm.
So that was the early message that Ebby brought. Now, Bill always considered him his sponsor. So the sponsorship concept came a little bit later in Alcoholics
Later.
Anonymous, but who was sober long? Who could Bill look back at to see who helped him? And there was Ebby. So
Yeah.
Ebby was always his sponsor, even though Ebby, there was periods of time where Ebby could not
Right.
stay sober, and that's kind of a tragic story in itself. But you can get a hold of some Ebby talks. He talked at some conventions, and there's some recordings of him, and he comes off about the way you would expect a businessman in his middle age in the 30s would come off. And
Which is proof to me, once again, that God can use whoever he wants to. Whether the person is sober for the rest of their life or whether they're a knucklehead and they crash and burn every other week.
the Bible is absolutely chock full of
Yeah.
examples of that.
Yeah,
You
right?
know what I mean?
Oh my
So
God.
so yes, that's very, very true. And so we have a debt to pay to Ebby. Really, he wasn't trying to get Bill sober. He was trying to get him into the Oxford group.
Hmm.
They would do what's known as witnessing,
Right.
and that's trying to get somebody involved in the practice of the worship of God, and the type of living that they believed the first century Christians lived,
Hmm.
and that's what Ebby was doing over there that day. They were tasked with witnessing.
Yeah.
So that's the story of Ebby. God bless him. There's a book on Ebby. I haven't read it, but there's a book on it from Pittman Publishing or something. If anybody really wants to dig in any deeper, but let's see what Bill has to say. This was written in 1966, June 1966, in remembrance of Ebby. In his 70th year, and on the 21st of March, my friend and sponsor Ebby passed beyond our sight and hearing. On a chill November afternoon in 1934, it was Ebby who had brought me the message that saved my life. Still more importantly, he was the bearer of the grace and of the principles that shortly afterward led to my spiritual awakening. The grace and the principles. This was truly a call to new life in the spirit. It was the kind of rebirth that has since become the most precious possession of each and all of us. So what is the most precious possession of each and all of us in Alcoholics Anonymous? This spiritual awakening, this new
Yeah.
life, the consciousness of the presence of God.
Mm.
Let's just call it that.
Hmm.
And I love Bill's writings. There's so many people in AA that really want to move on from Bill's writings because they've got problems with the spirituality or problems with the religious tonation
Yeah.
of all of this stuff. But Bill is always uncompromising. He had the one message. You know what I mean?
Yep.
There was the one program of recovery, not program of recovery B and C. There was program of recovery A.
I heard it was said one time, if you have a plan B, you're probably going to need it.
Yeah, yeah. If you have a plan B, how about fully trying plan A, our plan first? You may never need plan B. Who
And
knows?
Chris, over the years, I've heard people say, "Oh, there's so and so. He says the same thing every meeting." But you know what? When the rubber meets the road, those are the guys that I want to hold on to because they're consistent. They don't change. They're focused. You know what I mean? And they have the same message because the message that they carry is worth depth and weight. It's not some flippity floppity thing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. As I looked upon him where he lay in perfect repose, I was stirred by poignant memories of all the years I had known and loved him. There were recollections of those joyous days in Vermont boarding school. After the war years, we were sometimes together, then drinking, of course. Alcohol, we thought, was the solvent for all difficulties, a veritable elixir for good living. Then there was that absurd episode of 1929. Ebby and I were on an all-night spree in Albany. Suddenly, we remembered that a new airfield had been constructed in Vermont on a pasture near my old hometown. The opening day was close at hand. Then came the intoxicating thought, if we could only hire a plane, we'd beat the opening by several days, thus making aviation history ourselves. Forthwith, Ebby routed a pilot friend out of bed, and for a stiff price we engaged him and his small craft. We sent the town fathers a wire announcing the time of our arrival. In mid-morning we took to the air, greatly elated and very tight, which would mean very drunk.
Yeah.
We don't call it tight much anymore. Somehow, our rather tipsy pilot set us down on the field. A large crowd, including the village hand and a welcoming committee, lustily cheered his feat. The pilot then deplaned, but nothing else happened, nothing at all. The onlookers stood puzzled in silence. Where were Ebby and Bill? Then the horrible discovery was made. We were both slumped in the rear cockpit of the plane, completely passed out. Kind friends lifted us down and stood us up upon the ground. Whereupon we history makers fell flat on our faces. Ignominiously, we had to be carried away. The fiasco could not have been more appalling. We spent the next day shakily writing apologies. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to be the first people to land on this brand new airport, and they were. Listen, Ebby's house is up in East Dorset, Vermont, where he grew up, and there's tours. If you go to the Wilson House, you can find some people with some historical perspective who'll take you around and show you, the Burburton School, where Bill went, the country club where he learned to play golf and tried to surpass Sam Snead or whatever, and all those places are still there. And I remember, driving by Ebby's house. Somebody owns it. Somebody lives there.
Yeah.
But I stopped on the street and I'm taking pictures, and the people that live in that house must wonder why do all these people stop and take pictures here all the time? I got to tell you this story. So Bill was in a brownstone in Brooklyn for a long time, and it became famous because it was in our literature. The address of it was in our literature.
Okay.
So we were doing the Brooklyn Roundup. It was a big convention thing, and some of us were talking about maybe going over and checking out the brownstone, and somebody had already done it. And this is what happened: they went up to the brownstone where Bill lived for years, and decided they were going to knock on the door. And so they knock on the door, and somebody comes to the door, and they're irate, and they're like what? And they're, well, we just, you're from AA, aren't you? and they go, yeah. People knock on this door 3 times a day. They didn't tell us this. They didn't tell us this when they said, we paid $3 million for this place, and you alcoholics are always knocking on our doors. Slam.
Wow.
Is that great? I think the foundation, if we have a prudent reserve of $20 million or something,
right.
I think Alcoholics Anonymous ought to buy that brownstone and turn it into a museum or something.
Right.
These poor homeowners, are tortured by us. We're going back to Mecca, and these people just bought Mecca and want to be left alone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Crazy.
Yeah, well, if they're not careful, it might cause them to drink. We might see them in the meetings.
We might.
Those poor folks.
Well, they wouldn't have to go far for
no, they wouldn't,
for a 12-step call. Over the following 5 years, I seldom saw Ebby, but of course, our drinking went on and on. In late 1934, I got a terrific jolt when I learned that Ebby was about to get locked up. The time in the state mental hospital following a series of mad sprees He had run his father's new Packard off the road and into the side of a dwelling, smashing right into the kitchen and just missing a terrified housewife. Thinking to ease this rather awkward situation, Ebby summoned his brilliant smile and said, "Well, my dear, how about a cup of coffee?" So, so,
Great.
so somebody I know is a historian, right? He went back into the early newspapers, and sure enough, he found this story of Ebby going through this woman's kitchen. It's in a newspaper article somewhere.
No.
Of course, Ebby's lighthearted humor was quite lost on everyone concerned. Their patient wore thin. The town fathers yanked him into court. To all appearances, Ebby's final destination was the insane asylum. To me, this marked the end of the line for us both. Only a short time before, my physician, Dr. Silkworth, had felt obliged to tell Lois there was no hope for my recovery, that I, too, would have to be confined, else risk insanity or death. But Providence would have it otherwise. It was presently learned that Ebby had been paroled into the custody of friends who, for the time being, had achieved their sobriety in the Oxford group. And this was Roland Hazard and Shep Cornell, and
They showed up in court, didn't they?
Yeah, there was a bunch of them. They had a little crew. They had a little home group. They brought Ebby to New York, where he fell under the benign influence of AA's great friend-to-be, Dr. Sam Shoemaker, the rector of the Calvary Episcopal Church. Much affected by Sam and the Oxford group, Ebby promptly sobered up. Hearing of my serious condition, he had straightway come to our house in Brooklyn. As I continued to recollect, the vision of Ebby looking at me across our kitchen table had become wonderfully vivid. Another thing, that kitchen table is at Stepping Stones in New York, and I've sat at that table.
Really?
With the original coffee pot.
Wow.
How cool is that?
Wow. Now that's going back to Mecca, baby.
Yeah, I think so. As most AAs know, he spoke to me of the release from hopelessness that had come to him through the Oxford group as a result of the self-survey, step 4, restitution, step 9, outgoing helpfulness to others, step 12, and prayer, a whole bunch of different steps. In short, he was proposing the attitudes and principles that I used later in developing AA's 12 steps to recovery. And there it is. He says it. He says it. He used those principles for AA's 12 steps. It had happened. One alcoholic had effectively carried the message to another. Ebby had been enabled to bring me the gift of grace because he could teach me at depth through the language of the heart. He had pushed ajar the great gate through which all in AA have since passed to find their freedom under God. You know, Bill doesn't want to say a bad thing about anybody. There was a lot of problems with Ebby's sobriety. There's a lot of problems with Henrietta Seiberling. There was a lot of problems in his life, conflict. And when you read his writings, he is not critical of any of these people in any way. He is a consummate gentleman.
Isn't it interesting how the human being can find something wrong with even the most humble and kindest people? I mean, yeah, Bill had his issues. We all know that, and we're glad he did. Otherwise, we'd be going, we don't get it. But come on. I mean, and I still run into Bill Wilson naysayers, don't you?
There was one who just, I'm sitting there talking in a meeting the other day, and he came up and he just decided to start talking about, why Bill Wilson was a failure. And I just looked at him like you got the wrong audience here, dude.
Oh my gosh.
Bill and all his affairs. Okay, that's all well and fine. If you're in a glass house,
you're right.
Go ahead and throw some stones. I'm sure you've lived the picture perfect life, Chumley. You know what I mean? I had a blank stare, and he kept moving. That wasn't a conversation I was really feeling comfortable to join.
Yeah.
And listen, I've read all the stuff. I know it makes me love him more
Me too.
that he was imperfect.
Me too.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
If he was some perfect, if this program was put together by Pope McGillicuddy or something who'd never sinned in his life, I probably wouldn't have paid any attention to it.
I hear you.
So sometimes sometimes it's our imperfections that make us lovable, Monty. Don't you think so?
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Well, great article. So I think we got time for another one, don't we?
Yeah. In memory of Harry. I don't know who he's talking about here. I might as we get into it, but this is July 1966. Let's see who Harry is. By the time this issue of the Grapevine reaches its readers, the whole world of AA will have heard of the passing of our well-beloved friend, Dr. Harry Thiebaud, the first psychiatrist ever to hold the hands of our Fellowship for All to See. Okay, it's Dr. Thiebaud, who was. There's great writings by Harry Thiebaud about the reemergence and the rebuilding of the ego and all this stuff that's really pertinent for long-term sobriety and recovery. I highly recommend it to anybody. But anyway, his gifts of courageous example, deep perceptions of our needs, and constant labor on our behalf have been and always will be values quite beyond our reckoning. It began like this. The year was early 1939. The book Alcoholics Anonymous was about to hit the press. To help with the final edit of that volume, we had made pre-publication copies in multigraph form. Monty, if you have one of those, they are worth some money. Our friend Ben from Austin, Texas, has 2 of them.
Really? Oh wow!
Two multigraph copies.
Ooh.
One of them fell into Harry's hands. Though much of the content was then alien to his own views, he read our upcoming book with deep interest. Far more significantly, he at once resolved to show the new volume to a couple of his patients, since known to us as Marty and Grenny. These were the toughest kind of customers and seemingly hopeless. At first, the book made little impression on this pair. Indeed, its heavy larding with the word God so angered Marty that he threw it out her window. Flounced off the grounds of the Schwank Sanitarium where she was, and proceeded to tie on a big bender. Grenny didn't carry a rebellion quite so far. He played it cool. When Marty finally turned up shaking badly and asked Dr. Thiebaud what next to do, he simply grinned and said, "You better read that book again." Back in her quarters, Marty finally brought herself to leaf through its pages once more. A single phrase caught her eye, and it read, "We cannot live with resentment." The moment she admitted this to herself, she was filled with a transforming spiritual experience. He might be talking about Marty Mann. I bet you anything he's talking about Marty Mann. Marty Mann started the National Council on Alcoholism, which is something I'm still a board member of.
Right.
Wow. Forthwith, she attended a meeting. It was at Clinton Street, Brooklyn, where Lois and I lived. That's the brownstone.
That's the
that
brownstone.
I was telling you on Clinton Street. Returning to Blythewood, she found Grenny intensely curious. Her first words to him were these: "Grenny, we are not alone anymore." This was the beginning of recovery for both. Recoveries that have lasted until this day. Watching their unfoldment, Harry was electrified. Only a week before, they had both presented stone walls of obstinate resistances every approach. Now they talked, and freely. To Harry, these were the facts, and brand new facts. Scientist and a man of courage that he was, Harry did not for a moment look the other way. Setting aside his own convictions about alcoholism and its neurotic manifestations, he soon became convinced that AA had something, perhaps something big. All the years afterward, and often at very considerable risk to his professional standing, Harry continued to endorse AA. Considering Harry's professional standing, this required courage of the highest order. Let me share some concrete examples. In one of his early medical papers that noted one on surrender, he had declared this ego-reducing principle to be not only basic to AA, but also absolutely fundamental to his own practice of psychiatry. This took humility as well as fortitude. It will always be a bright example for us all. That's one of the writings that I was talking about. That I guess it's called Surrender. That's phenomenal. All this stuff is online. If anybody's curious, just go to the Google like everybody else does, right, right Monty? Nevertheless, this much was but a bare beginning. In 1944, helped by Kirby Collier of Rochester and Dwight Anderson of New York, Harry had persuaded the American Medical Society of the state of New York to let me, a layman, read a paper about AA at their annual gathering. 5 years later, this same trio, again spearheaded by Harry, persuaded the American Psychiatric Association to invite the reading of another paper by me, this time in their 1949 annual meeting at Montreal. By then, AA had about 100,000 members, and many psychiatrists had already seen at close range our impact on their patients. That's amazing. That's amazing. That you know how closed door psychiatric and medical associations can be. I mean, if you don't have the letters after your name, I don't want to hear about it. And so this went at odds with for this ruffled a lot of feathers. However, he saw something working, something he couldn't do. You know what I mean, Monty?
Yeah. Wow. This reminds me, I got to say real quick. This reminds me of a gathering. It was called the Evolution of Addiction Treatment Conference. It was in LA, and I think C4 ended up taking it over at one point before they dissolved. And Dr. Alan Berger and another guy put it on, and they did it until they ran out of money, basically. But there was a guy named Rabbi Taub, and this guy, I mean, he had the whole get up, you know what I mean? The big dark black cloak and the rabbi hat and the twirly sideburns. I mean, this guy was authentic, right? And he was a Messianic Jew. And this room, hundreds of psychiatrists, psychologists, and medical doctors are in this room. And Rabbi Taub is giving the opening talk. And I'm like, I looked at Marcia and I said, this is going to be interesting how this is going to go. Because most of these guys, from what I was overhearing, weren't too hep on this whole spiritual thing. Right. And this is what Rabbi Taub said. He introduced himself and he said, this room is filled with nothing. And you're like, what? And he goes, we are all nothing. You're nothing. I'm nothing. We're nothing. And you could have heard a pin drop. And he said, God does not make something out of something. He makes something out of nothing. And that's what he's doing with you this weekend. And they all stood up and started cheering. I was blown away. I thought for sure I was going to see a tomato fly through the room. But no, they gave him a stand. And he wasn't even done with his talk. And I got to meet him afterwards. What a incredibly deeply spiritual man this guy was. And I was like, I fell in love with him after that.
Yeah. So I remember that conference when it was being designed and getting ready to be implemented. I can't remember the guy's name. He was somebody who was funding it with Alan Berger, right? And they tried to get me involved. My problem at that period of time was I didn't have 3 weeks to fly out to California on my own dime, to help put and do all this work. I don't remember if I passed on it or they passed on me. I can't remember, but I remember when the concept was coming up, and like a lot of good concepts, I don't think it had a second. I don't think it had a second edition. Did it?
I think they had 3.
Yeah,
that
three.
that
Okay,
they were fun. It was Andrew Martin was the other
that's
guy.
who it was.
Yeah.
Andrew was the guy who called me up and wanted me to be a part of it.
And it went, it was kind of like, for people that are listening that may never been to one of these things, it's kind of like the home and boat show for treatment centers and stuff. Everybody's got their wares, but you even had the people with the spiritual bowls, where they would
The
the
singing bowls.
the
Yeah,
singing bowls, and they had, and then there were some celebrities that showed up that I was able to interview. Ken Seeley was there,
yeah.
from Intervention, and of course Dr. Berger. He was a
I
big
love
deal.
both those guys. I
Yeah.
love both those guys.
They're great guys, and so I think sometimes things serve a purpose for the time that they do, and then things change, and
Yes.
that's just the way it goes. But yeah, I just thought, wow, what a thing! I mean, how bold, right? Standing in front of a room of all these PhDs and medical doctors, and to say that, and to get the response that he got, I was like, wow,
That's crazy.
yeah, amazing.
For us of AA who were present at that gathering, it was a breathtaking hour. My presentation would be the spiritual experience, as we AAs understood it. Surely we could never get away with this. To our astonishment, the paper was extremely well received, judging at least from the sustained applause. Immediately after it, I was approached by a most distinguished old gentleman. He introduced himself as an early president of the American Psychiatric Association. Beaming, he said, "Mr. W., it is very possible that I am the only one of my colleagues here today who really believes in spiritual experience as you do. Once upon a time, I myself had an awakening much akin to your own, an experience that I shared in common with two close friends, Buck and Whitman. Naturally, I inquired, but why did your colleagues seem to like the paper?" His reply went like this: "You see, we psychiatrists deeply know what very different people you alcoholics really are. It was not the client's claims of your paper that stirred my friends. It was the fact that AA can sober up alcoholics wholesale. Seen in this light, I was more deeply moved by the generous and magnificent tribute that had been paid to us of AA. My paper was soon published in the American Psychiatric Journal, and our New York headquarters was authorized by the association to make all the reprints we wished for distribution. By then, the trek of AA overseas had well begun. Heaven only knows what this invaluable reprint accomplished when it was presented to psychiatrists in distant places by the fledgling AA groups. It vastly hastened the worldwide acceptance of AA." I could go on and on about Harry, telling you of his activities in the general field of alcoholism, of his signal service on our AA board of trustees. I could tell stories of my own delightful friendship with him, especially remembering his great good humor and infectious laugh. But the space allotted to me is too limited. Harry Emerson Fosdick. Now he was a big time writer too, wasn't he, Monty? Aren't there books
Yes.
by him?
Yes. Yeah. You bet.
Classics.
You bet. All right. Well, next week we got a article that's a little longer, and it should be actually. We're going to be talking about Sister Ignatia. And if you've never met her, listeners, you're going to meet her next week, or at least something about her. Somebody, again, that has played a very significant role in the Fellowship Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to, before we sign off today, I want to refer people to a website. On our website at take12radio.com, you'll see a big purple banner towards the bottom that says our Recovery Podcast Network. And these are podcasters that I've hand-chosen, some of my favorite out there. There's literally hundreds of podcasters doing this kind of work now. But these are some of my favorites. And one of them who's brand new, he's number 3 on the list, is our new friend from Tennessee, Paul H. And he has a podcast called 3, and that's using the number 3 if you're looking it up, Legacies Recovery Recordings. Now, there's a lot of folks out there bringing speaker tapes and turning them into YouTube versions and so forth. Paul's doing something a little different. He's doing some of that, but he's also interviewing folks and bringing them on. And of course, you are one of his guests on Tuesdays, I believe it is, right, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah. And you're going through, correct me if I'm wrong, something that has to do with the proper presentation of the steps.
So it's called an adequate presentation of the 12 steps. So there's a million big book studies out there, Monty. You and I have been involved in a lot of them.
Yeah.
The perspective of this particular one is how do you move your prospect, protege, sponsee? How do you move them through the 12 steps? How do you encourage them and show them how to take these steps and be part of that journey with them? So it's not a step workshop about how I can be better. It's a step workshop about how can I help somebody else be better.
Wonderful. And so Paul has you on Tuesdays, and he's got
KDP from Austin is one of the ones he did this week. KDP is one of my favorite people on the planet and a total force of nature.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? She's a stiff drink of water, and you're gonna have a lot of fun listening to her.
What's nice is being able to listen to these things with some clarity. Sometimes when you listen to speaker tapes, because of the recording quality at the convention or the conference, there's a little less to be desired, right? And that's what we're stuck with. This is Paul talking to his guests. And so I highly recommend it. Paul is very humble, loves God, loves Alcoholics Anonymous, and just a great guy.
And you're really mentoring him too. I mean, that's what he told me. He says he's learning so much from you, Monty, because of all your experience.
Yeah, and it's a joy to do that. It really is. This is because he brings it up. He when he first started, he said that he was like, somebody's got to get this stuff out there. Well, some of it was getting out there. He didn't know to what degree at the time, but he jumped on it, and he's doing a great job. And folks, I really, really want to send you over to 3 Legacies Recovering Recordings. You can Google that, or you can just go to our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Podcast Network banner, and you'll find Paul on there as well. All right. Well, another great episode. Thank you, sir. Listen to the end of the broadcast here, folks, so you can find out how you can catch up on over 90 of these so far on this particular workshop, Walking Through the Language of the Heart. We've got more coming for you. We'll talk about the possibilities of those later. Lord willing and the creek don't rise, right, Chris?
Yeah, you just don't know.
Yeah. All right, my friends, until our next broadcast, this is the Montyman along with the rest of the Take 12 Recovery Radio family, wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Montyman, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
This has been a Chicken and a Pig production.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof.